I'm Aaron Sagers, and this is Talking Strange.
Aloha, spooky nerds, and welcome to Talking Strange, a paranormal pop culture show with the Den of Geek network, where we discuss the entertainment of the unexplained. I am your host, Aaron Sagers, journalist, author, researcher of all things weird. Currently can be seen on Travel Channel and Discovery Plus's Paranormal Caught On Camera, and we've got season 5 right around the corner of that, so keep an eye out. Today, I'm very excited. I'm always excited. I say that a lot. I'm excited, but it's true. I am excited. But I'm excited about the new Discovery Plus shock docs that are going to be streaming, both of them, on Friday, February 18th, because these are cases that are not only iconic within the field of ufology, they are deeply kind of personal stories. They're rooted in people, not just seeing some sort of lights in the sky. They are human dramas, really. And I think that the people involved in them, I find them very believable. Now, the two shock docs, they're called Alien Abduction, the Betty and Barney Hill story, and Alien Abduction, Travis Walton. These are the most famous reports of close encounters of the fourth kind. And in these documentaries, these mysterious alleged abductions, in the shock docs, they weave archival footage together. They include these sometimes disturbing interviews, eerie experiences, and recounted by eyewitnesses and by victims. They utilize exclusive audio tapes. They include fascinating close encounter reports, and even decades after these stories became part of the mainstream, the documentaries include well-preserved evidence and add modern forensic technology. Now, at the heart of these two shock docs is my guest today. Now, he is a consulting producer on the shock docs. He's a UFO expert. He's a former federal criminal investigator. He's been on a mission for years to uncover the truth behind the country's most infamous UFO sightings. He is currently host of Discovery Plus's UFO Witness. He has been on Ghosts of Morgan City, Fact or Faked over on the Sci-Fi Network, and he's someone that I've been happy to know for more than a decade now, I think. So without further ado, let me bring in Mr. Ben Hansen.
Hey, Aaron.
Hey, Ben.
How's it going?
It's going very well. I'm happy to have you here on these early episodes of what we are now calling Talking Strange, this paranormal pop culture podcast. And how are you doing?
I'm good. Super busy. You know, like we waited through COVID and hoping that it's over soon. But the TV production stuff found a way to work through it. So we're actually filming a second season of UFO Witness, and then these two shock docs were like, man, kind of right in the heart of it. When they wanted these done. So we were really lucky to get that out.
And let me just say, for anybody that's going to be viewing this as opposed to listening to it right now, it does look like Ben Hansen is speaking to us in a dark room. Oh wait, now I see him. For a second, your mic was, or your video was out. It looked like you were a UFO witness that was shrouded in the darkness.
Am I moving now? Am I live speed? Does it look
now
like
I see you. Yes, now we see your face.
Okay.
And it is funny. I was looking up when we were going to have this chat. I was just looking up when you and I first started chatting, and it was back in the sci-fi days. You were working back, I think it was SCI FI before a CFI for Fact or Faked. And at that point, I was a reporter before I inevitably started working as a producer and host for Sci-Fi. So I think it was 2010.
It's probably what it was, right? That's when Fact or Faked was announced, and I think we probably met at that New York Christmas party that they put on, right?
Yeah, there was a press event, and then there was the early days where it would be like Ben Hansen and Fact or Fake team, Josh Gates, and then Ghost Hunters, like Amy Bruni, and then probably Jason Hawes would be there. It was just like, and now everything old is new again because everybody's back together.
I know,
basically,
it's the same family basically.
Yeah,
it's like if I look back at that and someone told me, you would still be doing shows like this and they would still be relevant, because a lot of that stuff could be trendy, and it did go away for a little bit. But to have networks that totally embrace it and not only bring it back, but bring back some of the same people who are doing it, I think is awesome. Because I thought, they're going to want, some new face or something. Like, no, we like the family. So
yeah,
it's pretty fun.
Yeah, it felt like there was a bit of a programming blip for a while where around 2012, 2013, the shows just started going away, except for just a core couple shows. And then here we are. It is big again. And yes, specifically within the world of UFOs, it seems even more relevant and timely than ever before.
Absolutely.
And well, with that, just as far as your credentials, your bona fides, if you will, for anybody that is not familiar with you, I don't know who that would be, but anyone that's not familiar with you, talk a little bit about how you got into this element, this sphere professionally and personally. Yeah.
Well, it goes back to probably when I was like 5 years old, and I really was fascinated by space. I was one of the kids that wanted to telescope. ET was a big influence on me, because the idea that there could be extraterrestrials, and ET was a friendly one, and then along came Close Encounters, which was really frightening, and then in the end it was friendly. But it was just the whole idea that we could be visited. I started cutting out newspaper clippings, and the 80s were a big time for that. There was a lot, but all we had was the newspaper, and I started collecting, and then I started reading books, and so I kind of put that away, in my teen years, because it had a stigma to it that it doesn't now. Kids now can be like, oh yeah, I believe in UFOs, and it's totally fine. But like when I had my friends come over and stuff, they're like, what? That's weird. You believe in this, and so anyways, that's kind of my informal beginnings into it. And then how did I get into it now? Well, I'd like to say that I'm lucky that I knew a lot of nerdy stuff. Mm-hmm. I knew a lot of history, which is what UFOs is really about, is history. And X-Files is popular in high school. So you can see the thread here. Yeah, the TV shows really did influence me, but I knew it wasn't real. There wasn't an X-Files. But it helped me look into law enforcement and, working for the FBI for a bit. And then an opportunity came along that the Sci-Fi Channel, back when we were on that network, to put together a show. And they were like, wait a sec. So you have a background in the investigation stuff, but you actually into this. I'm like, oh yeah. Yeah, I'm kind of a closet paranormal UFO guy. And that's kind of how it started.
Hmm. Yeah, no, and it's funny because for me as well, having grown up in the 80s and loving this stuff, there was that personal dip for me as well, where I didn't necessarily stop loving it. I just kind of stopped really embracing that passion. I think maybe it was that moment where you tell yourself it's time to put away childish things and then be like an adult or a cool teenager or whatever, and then you realize no, it is actually cool to be the nerd.
Who knew that adults were like this? If your child self could look into the future and be like, wait, you're gonna still be doing this, and you're gonna be talking about getting, like your career is gonna be based around weird things you shouldn't believe in right now.
Yeah, it's like, hey, mom and dad. Yeah, all of the magazines and all the weird stuff that I was collecting, mysteries of the unknown from Time Life, all of that stuff. Actually, it was job training for me.
That's right. That's right.
With these two shock docs, and I'm gonna play a clip in a moment, but just in a general sense, why do you think these two stories, the Travis Walton story and the Betty and Barney Hill story, Why are they so significant, and why should they be paired together to both premiere on February 18th on Discovery Plus?
So that's a great question, because the production company that was putting this together had kind of reached out to me, knowing that I was in this space, and they had already come up with the two cases they wanted to do and had discussed it with the network. And they're the exact same two cases I've always said are the most well documented, and I think evidenced UFO alleged abductions. And I say the word alleged abductions, or the phrase, because when you talk to Travis, as you know, he doesn't even like to really term it as an abduction. It would appear, and everything that you learn from the case, that they were not from this world, but as an abduction in the general sense, it's nothing like the movie was, the movie Fire in the Sky, right? And so there's that element of it. But I tell Travis, and I say this a lot, it's not, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that he was lucky the way it turned out. I would not wish that upon anyone. It was very frightening. But he was lucky in that he had 6 other witnesses. You had law enforcement involvement. You had, some physical evidence that we're able to see then and now, which a lot of cases don't have any of. And so you have one guy. I mean, imagine if Travis was alone, and it's like, yeah, I saw this thing and it came down, and how long have I been gone? I'm back now. Who would believe it?
Yeah.
Right. But you had all this stuff that documented with law enforcement and the official account that really helps, so that we heard about the story. And then I'm betting Barney Hill, it was set in a time period in the early 60s that instantly it was going to draw attention, as well, because they were a high profile couple. They were in the Northeast. Barney was working for the
NAACP.
Thank you, the NAACP.
Yeah.
He was a chairperson working for civil rights, and they were an interracial couple. And this is not your typical. This is not someone you would expect to come forward and to make up a crazy story of sighting a UFO. He's very, very skeptical. So I like that part of it. But what happened after is the reluctant witnesses come forward, and it doesn't have the total number of witnesses as Travis's does, but you have hypnosis and Bud Hopkins, and it really was the first widely, shared and pronounced story of an abduction. Because up until that point, it was a lot of sightings and some kind of fringe topics of people saying that they went to Venus, but not like abductions.
Yeah.
So that in a nutshell, I think the two of them together, investigated by some of the same researchers, the iconic, Hynek and Bud Hopkins and all those, that I think we're left now with history still scratching our heads. What happened here?
Yeah, both Project Blue Book and NICAP investigated the Hill story.
Yep.
Yeah.
They did. And of course, Travis has happened well after, Blue Book closed, but you had people like NICAP and I'm blanking on the Lorenz, the Lorenz's,
the LARP, not LARP, that group.
You can tell that I just came off an early flight this morning, so I apologize. But you had these people who that we cite now, as the most like dedicated to scientific method and everything that they APRO. So the most dedicated towards the scientific method and things of the time that we're trying to. In fact, the government cites these organizations, and they cite them because you had, people like Donald Kehoe, running, NICAP and stuff. And so anyways, well respected, as respected as they could be in their time period, and they didn't just take whatever case that came along. And so this has persisted. You have Travis Walton, 1975, and Barney Hill, 1961, and it really kind of set the stage now for a lot of TVs, a lot of movie and TV shows that came afterwards that put that in the public consciousness. What does a gray look like? What is this? What is that? But see, none of that really existed before that.
Yeah, and well, let's show just sort of the opening clip from the Betty and Barney Hill alien abduction shock doc, and then we'll come back and talk more about that one in particular, and then we'll show the Travis Walton one a little bit later. Let's throw to that. Kudos to you guys for finding a voiceover guy that has shades of like Leonard Nimoy intonation. Sounds very like, and it is, both of these documentaries I thought were very well put together, and I'll say, like, some of my favorite of this series that I've seen. But this is a really good one. Or these are both really good ones. Now, what we're hearing in that clip, when we're hearing the voices of Betty and Barney, those come to us from the regression sessions with Dr. Hyken. That happened a couple of years after their initial experience.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the thing that always blows me away with this case with Betty and Barney Hill is, first off, as you mentioned, these are people that were active in their community and church, but as an interracial couple in the early 60s, they did not want undue attention. Maybe attention for pursuing civil rights, but not the attention that this kind of thing, the stigma that this would bring to them. And yet their story became public not entirely because of their choice, right?
Yeah, it's a distraction for what they were trying to accomplish, and it doesn't help, especially that time period, because they're having organization and serious meetings, and he's already in the press for the participation in civil rights. And so if you're to attach a byline or something onto that, it's like, oh, an alleged alien abductee, it didn't help, and so that they didn't want that. And the regression tapes, the medical exams, all of that stuff, they actually did come out, and at least, I don't quote me on this, but at least they went to one, maybe two different public meetings they're invited to speak at.
Church
so
gatherings,
it wasn't like,
I think.
What's that?
Yeah. It was like two different church gatherings, one in private and then one a little bit more public, if I recall.
Yeah, so they had come out. It wasn't like they were completely silent about it, but then there was a reporter that got wind of it, and without talking to them, kind of wrote it up and talked to the doctor, and some things there. And so it was released, the way I understand the story, without their involvement or permission, and that's kind of what let everybody else know what happened here. Right. And then the phone's ringing off the hook.
Yeah.
Everyone wants to get involved. And so it's, from the beginning, especially, Barney was very hesitant. Barney, Betty came back from that and became obsessed. And it really strained the relationship, because it stopped talking about it. And he was in complete denial until he was suffering some physiological effects, and not feeling well and everything. So okay, well, let's go in and talk to this psychologist, and I think he's a psychiatrist, actually, and went in and started the sessions with him, and little by little he came to accept that something happened. And that's how it went.
Yeah, and when you listen to that audio, Even though I've heard it multiple times, and I think you do a nice job of presenting it in the shock docs. You know, I've spent a career interviewing people, both as a true news journalist, I mean, a serious news journalist, and then entertainment news journalist, and then paranormal stuff. I've spent an entire career talking to people, interviewing people, gauging people's emotions, and these just sound raw. They sound believable. These are people that are put under, but you're getting this like this disturbing emotion coming out of them.
Yeah, and I think that's something you could really hang your hat on, because at the end of the day, even if you don't believe what happened in the craft, you have a couple that the doctor took great care to isolate them and not include, like way down the hallway so they couldn't hear what the other one was saying for multiple sessions before he brought them together and started to let them remember. You know, he would put a post-hypnotic suggestion, they'd forget it because it would be too traumatizing, to have that consciousness of what they just saw. So little by little, he let them remember it. But both of them, like you said, Barney's, if nothing else, I think you can hang your hat on the fact that when they're legitimately in a deeper state of hypnosis, what comes out is raw. And it's not like there's someone prone to faking that anyways. But if you knew their personality, according to, their niece and the family and everyone who knows them, that they would not sit there, especially Barney, and put on a show. Remember that he didn't want this attention.
Yeah.
And so whatever it was, it deeply impacted him. And it was like a PTSD thing.
Some of the biggest criticisms about, or things that naysayers say about this case is that, one, that over the couple years before they went through the hypnosis, is that, that the dreams that Betty was having was sort of leaking into Barney's mind and the influencing him, essentially. There's that. But then also this idea that they were influenced by an Outer Limits, the sort of Twilight Zone TV show at the time, because there was an episode where there was an alien with strange eyes, and meanwhile the creature that they're discussing having encountered on board has wraparound eyes, what we very much associate with the Greys, as you said earlier. What do you say to that? To me, look, I'll say up front, it sounds like a stretch, but what's your reaction when you're hearing those two things that are used to discount this story?
Well, it's always reasonable. That's one of the most reasonable theories I've heard. I mean, aside from the ridiculousness of Philip Klass and him coming out like with Travis's story and changing every week, they saw Jupiter, they saw this and that. At least somebody, proposing a theory is like trying to look at. In fact, they said the same thing about Travis, because the movie, right, that came out about Betty and Barney Hill, starring Terrence Mann, was it?
It was
no, James Earl Jones.
James Earl Jones.
James Earl Jones was playing Barney, and that came out that summer before, I think, Travis's event. And so like, oh well, Travis must have seen this, and Travis must do this and that, and so it is a quite a stretch. The key here that people don't really focus on is, even if we're not quite sure what happened in the missing time element, there was missing time. It seems pretty well documented. According to their accounts, something happened there, and they were fully awake and fully conscious when they had the very, very close encounter of the craft itself and it coming down. And so to me, at least in my mind, the only real debatable thing, if we are to assume they're telling the truth, which I think they are based on all the investigation was done post, then what happened on aboard the ship? And so it is reasonable to bring up those things and say, well, they perhaps contaminated this dream and that. And that's why I really like Dr. Simons. If you read the book, The Interrupted Journey, and you read the foreword of it, he didn't want this attention either, but he was very objective. And he even allows that possibility at first, I think he says, I thought that maybe, you know, her dreams she was telling to him or something rather, but he's like, look, at the end of the day, they experienced something real.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, I think that's at least a good starting point that we could say they saw something incredible. Even that, very difficult to say it was from this world, and then go from there to, okay, well, let's just work out what happened aboard the ship. I don't know if that makes sense, but I can't say for 100% certainty myself that all their details are accurate, although that much care was taken to keep them separated. And there's parts of Barney's story that are completely separate for things that she didn't know. So how could she have told him those things in her, you know, sleep talking or whatever? So
yeah. And the trauma that it sounds like they're experiencing in those regression sessions, it's one thing if you tell me a story, or, you know, if a close confidant, a partner, or whatever, tells me a story and tells me over and over and over again, I might believe the story. I might even incorporate it into my own memories. But this level of trauma and emotion, not a psychologist, but it seems like that is pretty intense for Barney to be feeling, to experiencing what he's saying he experienced, just by that influence. That, you know, something that is mentioned in the shock docs that, I don't know, I hadn't thought about this before, even though I knew this piece of information, it didn't click with me. Barney was married previously. He had 2 children, 2 sons. Was there ever any interviews conducted with these 2 sons of Barney Hill from the previous marriage? And did their father discuss this incident with them?
not that I know. You know, I was with the production for it was in the heart in the right in the middle of COVID, so I didn't actually go out to New Hampshire with them, and a lot of it was done remotely and from the archival footage. So it was a really hard time to travel. I'm not sure if they followed that up or tracked it down, to be honest. I don't even know if he had a relationship with them.
Yeah.
Yeah, it would be good to know, though, because you would think, like they did with Betty's family, they told all the kids. They would go up there summers afterwards and bring him to the spot. And for many months after, they were kind of obsessed with retracing their route to find out where they were exactly, and the mile marker when they remember hearing the beeping noise and then where they reappeared. And so that part of the family was very well integrated into it.
When the news went global, we spoke a moment ago about the reporter John Luttrell. So he took it public in 1965. Yes, they had done a couple talks about it. So he didn't warn them he was doing this, and it seemed like there was someone from their inner circle. I don't know who it is. Someone from their inner circle that leaked information. But without this story would not have been told on the global scale. So there's this ethical kind of quandary here about, it's ultimately, I think we're pleased that this story got out here because it gives us something to examine and look at, but it is also a story of 2 people and their private life. So do you view Luttrell in this story as a villain, or maybe not a hero, but a anti-hero, a person that did something good? How do you wrap your brain around Luttrell? And, you know, now we have, you know, some of Betty's family that's still around. How do they view him?
Yeah, I don't know. Kathleen, I think they just kind of accepted it is what it is. Reporters are going to do what they're going to do. You know, no offense, but no, they're going to, if a story's good and he didn't need their permission, it wasn't him, you know, violating a confidentiality. The story as he heard it, you know, he's like, if I remember correctly, there was something where he was like, if I'm going to go forward with this, I don't remember. I don't want to speculate. I forget the exact details of how it went out, but you're right. And it really parallels that little pivot point. The same thing with Travis Walton, in that if Travis hadn't gone missing, even with the 7 people that were involved in the logging crew, it would be a fantastical story and you might hear a little bit about it. But it was the fact that he went missing They got the police involved. They got the search party involved, international attention, because Travis, if he had been, let's say he went on a 1 hour ride and came back and he was all fine, walked into town, he didn't want this out. It was not his doing. And he didn't want to be that guy. And so both stories were kind of propelled forward into the international attention against the will of those involved.
Yeah, I mean, I do view the Hill story a little bit different as far as the actions of John Luttrell, because they were not, even though they were active in their community, they weren't public figures. So there's not a lot of news interest in saying this couple said they saw something. Maybe I don't know. I mean, with Travis's case, it was a missing persons, situation. So
true.
that's a little bit more of public interest, but that's perhaps, I mean, the thing that Luttrell did do is that he also had interviewed other people, correct? That kind of corroborated what Betty and Barney said they saw. We never really got to that before, right? Didn't make it out into the public sphere.
Yeah, and I do have to jump on another interview here in about 5 minutes it starts, but I wanted to add what you were saying, that there are other people interviewed, there are other the corroborating evidence. So it's kind of hard to compartmentalize any of these cases and say which the skeptics do, and it's fine. But they'll say, okay, well, what about the hypnosis sessions and all this? And then they want to apply that to the whole case and say, well, then it wasn't true. Okay, well, then you still have to deal with physical evidence. You have to still deal with the missing time amounts, the conscious, recollections, and the fact that we're still in both of these cases. I did on my show, UFO Witness, we looked into the case, and I'm not going to give it away for those, you can go watch the UFO Witness episode too, but we borrowed some of the footage and my recounting of what happened with Betty's dress. And it is not definitive proof by any means. It's a speculation, but circumstantially, what Betty described as the examination that took place, and she said the long needle was inserted and they were doing some sort of pregnancy test. What was found on Betty's dress, that Kathleen, her niece, and the dress is up there at the university, and nobody had seen these stains before, the ones that I discovered with a black light.
Right.
And we had it tested. And so you can see kind of the results of that puzzle piece that I think helps support her story that something happened, because she put that dress away and never wore it again. And so we borrow from witness testimony. We borrow from what we can do with trace evidence, which, is so hard to do so many years after. But when you put it all together, give it a likelihood, a percentage that I do believe something very unusual happened in both of these cases.
So that's some really interesting evidence and genetic results that came out of the Hill abduction story. But I actually want to shift more to the story of Travis Walton, as we're also seeing in the Discovery Shock doc, also dropping on February 18th, along with the Hill alien abduction story. Before we get into that, let's actually throw to a clip from Alien Abduction, the Travis Walton story. Well, Ben, I think right there, that clip sets up a lot about this shock doc. And it's kind of right there, but I'm curious from your perspective, what are the big differences between the Travis Walton story and Betty and Barney Hill?
Well, as I was saying, like Travis, I wouldn't say, I was just talking to him yesterday, and, every time I say this, I don't want to say that he was lucky to be in that position, because I wouldn't call it luck. It was quite a bad experience for him. But he did have 6 other witnesses. Betty and Barney Hill, it was just the 2 of them, and there was not at the time, anything as far as a formal investigation, law enforcement. So the circumstances around when Travis went missing, it turned quickly into a murder investigation. right? You can't come down from the mountains and sort of like, well, hey, don't know how to say this, but our friend is missing, maybe dead. And, and the police are like, what are you talking about? And so it turns into a murder investigation and polygraphs. And so you have a lot of the official documentation backing everything up that happened around the disappearance, the return, and then you have all these witnesses. So I've studied a lot about hoaxers and why they do what they do. The truth is most people are not very good liars. People tend to be able to lie initially, but over the long run, when you're looking at so many years gone by as well that their stories are consistent, generally it starts to fall apart in the first couple of months, and then there's infighting, and then someone comes out and presents proof that it was hoaxed. And even though some of the how should I put this lightly, some of the crew members that I've dealt with over time have wished the focus was more on them, because there are jealousies involved. There's definitely jealousies, and they're coming out with their own versions of like, I think that maybe they were there for me, or I was more involved. The true facts of the case have never been disputed. No one's ever denied it, because they know there were 6 other people there with them, and that I think is one of the great strengths of this case.
Yeah, and well, for me personally, the fact that this case it happened a couple years before I was born, but it seems like the abduction case that I most grew up with, I would think that it was more present in my upbringing, because also because of the movie Fire in the Sky. I was more aware of that as a kid. But with this story, I mean, you said it, like, you have living eyewitnesses. Unfortunately, both the Hills have passed away at this point.
Mm-hmm.
And neither of these groups of people were seeking attention outright. As far as the phenomena that they experienced, what are some of the other differences? Because with the Hill case, they at times felt like they were being followed, but it was sort of a random follow. They were just sort of selected on the road and then taken up for experimentation. Compare and contrast that to the entities that Travis reports having encountered.
That's a great question, because I guess if we were to assign motive to these visitors, in the Betty Barney Hill case, it seemed more opportunistic in that they were just in the right place, or wrong place, wrong time, and they're isolated. You're up there in New Hampshire, and it's a very rural road, not many people passing at all. Incidentally, the mountains that they were in are the White Mountains in New Hampshire, which is the same the White Mountains of Arizona. I thought that was a little interesting where Travis was taken.
That is interesting.
Yeah, we kind of joked about it when I pointed out to Travis, and I'm like, did they just get, they're like, hey, we had success here in 61. And then they got confused with the map and ended up in Arizona the next time. But in Travis's story, he's kind of changed his perspective over the years, because at first he thought that perhaps they were there to that maybe they saw the vehicle coming, and so they came ahead of it and came down to hover in intercepting them. But now he honestly thinks that the word abduction it's a relative term, that maybe this wasn't an abduction. This was more like an ambulance rescue, because he wasn't supposed to be there. They may have come down to observe something, maybe some mechanical problems, whatever. They came down low. And when he walked up to the craft, he talks about from the time that he heard it rumbling, he stands up because like something's going to happen, and that he may have like created a grounding effect because he's the tallest thing now, and at a discharge of some sort of static comes out. Not like the movie where it's purposely beamed and risen up. He was actually blasted backwards, and it may have been a static discharge from the propulsion or something. So they see him on the ground, pick him up, and then that fits with what happens on board, where he ends up with some sort of thing on his chest, like maybe trying to heal him. And so that's different than the Hills case, where they were very communicative. the beings were kind of walking them through what they were doing. The testing that to both of them with reproductive systems and stuff like that was actually quite terrifying. Whereas in Travis's case, he was not probed. He didn't have, things put into his eye. Didn't wake up in a cocoon. And if you watch the movie and then see what actually happened, it's far more believable. That you see that he probably was not being examined as a specimen, but they were probably trying to heal him. And so that changes the dynamic completely.
Yeah, and I mean it's a really enjoyable movie, Fire in the Sky. Just it veers off so much from the experience that Travis talks about in his book and is talked about in the shock doc that will be seen in a few days. But the other kind of notable thing is that whereas the Hills had this experience with what we came to know as the gray aliens, Travis does encounter them as well as another species of alien.
Yeah, and that's completely left out of the movie. And to his credit, Tracy Torme, as you talk to him, he wasn't totally in favor of how they rewrote the script because they wanted it all terror, and it kind of ends that way, terror, 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 scary aliens. But what ended up happening, and people see or read the book or watch the documentary, is that he did encounter three, for all intents and purposes, humans, blonde hair, blue eyes, leading him out of the ship, seeming like they're trying to help him, as if they're trying to comfort him. So you have this interaction that would suggest that they were working with the Greys in coordination, which we hear a lot from alleged abductees. And then, but that was not really a concept then. And then you have Betty and Barney Hill, who did see kind of variations, taller, what you describe as Greys, but within that variety. So different visitors, perhaps, different intentions. Yeah, and then the way that it was perceived later, I think both of them, sets of groups, went through PTSD. Definitely, it's a scary, scary event, but I think both of them have also come to terms with it, and you see in the end that the therapy really helped Betty and Barney Hill, and it was more exciting to Betty. Betty was really obsessed after that and wanted more of it. Whereas Barney's like, okay, I'm okay with it, but no more, no more.
Well, and there was a reluctance with Travis as well to talk publicly about this for a while. I know that he made appearances on interviews, interview shows, and he did Larry King, and I guess there was sort of that very famous kind of segment with Larry King and then Philip Glass. Yeah.
Yeah.
But it took a while for Travis to start appearing at events and talking about this. I don't know if this was I don't know if it was 2010 when he first started, but I first met him around 2010 at Phenomenology, a paranormal event in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. Is that about when he first started?
It was exactly. And I don't necessarily want to take credit for this. It may have been coincidental, but he'd always had his book out there, but he had been in, I want to say hiding, but laying low for a very long time. And when my show Fact or Fake started, we wouldn't have taken on this case anyways, because we had to start with video or photo. But when I first met him through a mutual friend, he had not been out at the site for 7 years. I think he'd taken a film crew from, I don't know, 60 Minutes, some sort of film crew, but he hadn't been out there for a very long time. And he and it was kind of like a Wild West showdown. Like, he knew that I came from a show called Fact or Faked. My buddy's like, hey, you can trust Ben. He's not here to judge you. But then I was like, here's the guy that came from the movie Fire in the Sky, which is way out there, and I hadn't read the book yet. So we sat down at a Mexican restaurant, and there was not a lot of like jumping right into feeling comfortable. We like filling each other out. But by the time he took me up to the site, I saw a change in him, starting to open up, and this very humble guy, as when you meet him, he's just like not the type to go out there and and to really tell the whole world. And he doesn't like talking about it, but he came to terms with it. So about that time is when I started seeing him going on the circuits, and really kind of embracing, well, I can't hide from this. This is my story. And so he's kind of gone like that over the years.
Yeah. And, this is inserting my own subjectivity. Yeah. Having interacted with Travis, I find him to be a very kind man, and I find him to be very believable. And when he tells his story, it's not as if he's drumming it up for dramatic effect when he's telling it. It's just him kind of relaying what he remembers based on my experiences with him.
Mm-hmm.
From your approach, knowing him, it's certainly fascinating because you do have this living experience or someone that can talk about it. But how does it impact you as a documentarian, as a researcher? Because it is difficult to maintain that objectivity as well.
It is, and I've always said this to people, when you get into the UFO subject, it's kind of this continuum and this line. And if you were to take, like, on the far left side, let's say you have people who have seen lights in the sky, okay, and it's like, I don't know how to explain this. And then if you go to the far extreme of it, you have people who are talking about DNA hybridization. I've mothered, hybrid children, and excuse me, and there's this agenda. So it doesn't mean that any or all of that is true in the middle, but it's sort of this progression to where, like, if you believe that we have been possibly visited, then the next step would be, is it possible there's been physical contact and communication, and then abductions, right? And it goes along that. And Travis's was the first case for me where I had an open mind to be like, okay, well, yeah, sure. Why can't they hover and then something come out or someone go up on board the ship? And that was a leap. But I felt like if I believe Travis's story is real, which I do, and it was a real experience, then there has to be the possibility that others have had that. But how many? Right? And so, to take, for example, the Pascagoula case with Calvin Parker in Mississippi, very, very strange. And if you were to tell that story to me without having met the man or not knowing Travis's story, I'd say it's a wild tale. It's sci-fi. There's no way these floating kind of robots with pincher arms come down and pull you into a ship. But knowing the strange elements of Travis's, and then going to interview Calvin, he's almost a doppelganger to Travis in the demeanor, the way that things went down, and how he laid low, the honesty, the true salt of the earth type of rural kind of guy, that not that they're not incapable of lying, but when you know humans and you interrogate a lot of people, victims and stuff of other things, I believe that something happened to him as well. So, I mean, you're right. It is hard because each case influences another, but you have to try and isolate that specific incident and say, well, what you don't have, that's different than these or have, makes each case unique.
Yeah. And I agree with that. I mean, I think that can be applied to, I know it's a separate topic, but even when I listen to people tell ghost stories, there's a range of types of stories that people tell, but the ones I always find the most compelling are the ones that people don't want to tell, the ones that they're very kind of quiet about it and they're not anxious to share it. That's kind of when my ears perk up a little bit more. I want to ask you, I want to move on in a moment just to UFO Witness and your cases, but I do want to mention the Moment of Truth. There was a show on, I believe, Fox. Travis was on it. He took a polygraph test. He failed. Now, this was not the first time Travis had taken a polygraph test, and certainly the other loggers involved in this case all took polygraph tests. But as far as this moment, because people will bring it up, and then people will say, well, yeah, but then this guy failed the polygraph test on this reality show Moment of Truth. So I just didn't know if, coming from your background, if that's something that you can address and what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, sure. I've heard Travis talk about it, and I probably don't know enough of the details surrounding it to get too specific, but
sure.
From what I understand, I mean, according to him, there was something with the polygrapher itself, the shocking way that was set up. We don't honestly know if it wasn't contrived to, that it was truly an exploration of the truth, or if the end was already decided before. I have no idea, but
Mm-hmm.
I do know about polygraphs, and I can say that having taken several of them, they are not fun at all. And the white paper studies on them, as much as, here's the catch-22, because you've heard me bolstering the polygraph and saying that it's indicative of, if you believe the polygraph at all, that it would support the idea the whole crew's telling the truth. But on the flip side of it, it's all a matter of probabilities and statistics. Okay. Yeah. On its best day, the polygraph, they claim, is about 95% accurate. It's also in other studies down to as low as 80% accurate, but it suffers from false positives on the side of error. So in other words, it's more likely to find somebody claim that someone's lying when they're telling the truth than it is to claim someone's telling the truth when they're really lying. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So on that margin of error, you have a lot of people going to apply for federal jobs and things like that, and they ask, have you ever used drugs? And you're like, no, I have not. And if that person is naturally apprehensive or thinking about something with drugs, or had a bad day, had bad sleep, whatever, it could indicate, yes, you have used drugs. And so for me personally, it's not out of the realm of an aberration at all. That this happened to be an off day, or the polygrapher. There's so many factors. But talking statistically, empirically, you got to look at all the other times that were passed and by how much of the crew. So one time, after he's taken them multiple times,
yeah.
To me, just even if the polygrapher is on the up and up, it really doesn't matter too much.
You get someone like me who, if you were asked certain questions, I go through this like mental process of zigzagging through everything. Like, have you ever taken drugs? Well, what is a drug? Is okay? Is Excedrin a drug? Is well, okay. I was on morphine when I had my appendix out. That's a drug. Well, illegal drugs. What are we defining as a drug? Alcohol. Like, and then suddenly, once you start spinning out in your brain, then that result is still coming through.
Well, and the thing with polygraphs, so what most people don't realize, when you sit down, you are told what you're going to be asked. You're told beforehand what questions you're going to be asked. And then, and I don't know if that happened on this show exactly, the exact question you're going to be asked should be told you. And I think one of Travis's contentions was that they weren't following the protocol on how polygraph should be administered. But you're told what they're going to be asked, and then you can discuss it with the polygrapher. So you're supposed to be able to say, okay, well, and this happened to me in one of my questions. When I was in Peru, they give you the coca leaves, right? And I chewed them for the altitude sickness, but then I found out you can't bring them back to the US. So was I chewing an illegal drug? And so it's like, and that's in your head. And even though you've explained it and you should feel relief from it, you're right. It still psychologically impacts you when you've got a breathing tube, galvanic response, things on your fingers, and blood pressure cuff. I nearly fainted in one of my polygraphs. I was blacking out, and I'm like, this does not look good. Sweat's coming down my face. And at any rate, you're supposed to know the questions, and then you're asked them usually 2 or 3 times, the same questions, and you're not supposed to move at all. So it can produce anxiety in people who are prone to it just for test taking.
Yeah. Where do you think we are right now on, obviously there's with everything coming out in the last couple of years since the New York Times broke the 2017 story about, I guess that was a Tic Tac video, and then we're getting the release of documents just this past spring. obviously there's a lot of attentions on UFOs or UAPs, although I don't say UAP. I'm sticking with UFO. But for not just because stop trying to make UAP happen, but I also think it's a way of, this is so conspiratorial, but it's a way of them shifting the conversation away from UFO to UAP. I don't like it, but there is attention. There's a lot of videos people are capturing all the time, because we do live in a world where, for my own plug, where the paranormal is caught on camera. What is the balance between skepticism, open-mindedness, and then outright gullibility? How do we get the scientific community weighing in a serious way without necessarily following every SpaceX launch and drone and Chinese lantern?
Yeah. Well, for me personally, I've thought a lot about this and labels and terms. And I've always said that you shouldn't believe everything you hear, but you shouldn't disbelieve just because you haven't heard it before. And so being skeptical, everyone should be that. We are seeing academia starting to get more involved in this. You've got, Harvard and, some professors there wanting to start projects. You have, in fact, and I don't want to be too public about this yet, but in grad school, and I know I've said this before, I'm not going to make a point of it yet, but I'm doing my thesis statement on my master's related to, what would happen? Is the world ready if we had extraterrestrial contact? And for them and my professors to sign off on it, I was thinking, they're going to be like, that's way out. Why are you doing the university associated with it? But they were fully supportive. And so I think we are seeing some of that, but they're like dipping their foot in the water to test it. It's like, is it okay now? Mm-hmm. Can we start, weighing in on these things? And I think that is one of the biggest breakthroughs in the last couple of years, is that we're starting to have papers written, research done. NASA had this big headline that they'd hired theologians, to see if what would the public's reaction would be to religion. Would that survive? And so, but you're not going to see academics, I think, getting into the nitty gritty as much as like reviewing videos. You've got people like Mick West and the skeptics. Like, to his credit, Mick is one of the people who I respect, because he's not there just to argue for argument's sake. And I don't know if you followed him at all, but he's thrown out a couple things where I've had a video that he threw out a suggestion. It could have been this on the night vision camera. And I'm like, okay, let's try it. And I tried it. Yeah. And he was right. And that was the famous Jeremy Corbell video, the pyramids. It doesn't mean that these things are not UAPs and not exotic, but I think we have to be honest with ourselves. And both sides have to say, look, academia, if you are the true experts and you can explain to me cameras and things like that, tell me. And then let's try it, and we'll do the practical portion. We'll meet somewhere in the middle, and sometimes we'll agree and sometimes we won't.
What are your thoughts on disclosure? What does disclosure look like? I mean, you're a former government guy. Is disclosure going to come from the government, or is it going to be forced forward by the public with these reports that have been somewhat declassified? Is that our government saying, okay, we're going to throw you a couple tidbits and then we're going to close that door again? You got what you needed. Let's move on. I mean, what is disclosure?
What I want and what I think is going to happen are two things. Like I'm pretty pessimistic compared to a lot of people. That I'm on some email chains with, a lot of people who are in the forefront of this. And there's a lot of excitement that's going to happen this year, couple months. I really don't think so. If you just think about what do they have to gain, they meaning if they're secret keepers, here's what I do believe. When someone files a FOIA request, or the Office of Naval Intelligence or the Navy, Pentagon, whatever, comes out, their front office PR person says, this is all we have, or these are all the reports, Congress, that we've been mandated to give you. I honestly believe that might be true, because I think the front office people and what they have access to is far below where the real stuff, the secret keepers, if you will, are keeping the big Roswell secrets and all that. And so they could be telling the truth. I think the majority of the military, the government, has no clue what's going on. And probably the majority of the presidents. And so that is frustrating, because for them to give disclosure, what more are they going to tell you? It comes down to two parties. Them, whoever these visitors are, and whoever the very, very small group of secret keepers who still might be around are. And until they decide to do it, we don't have the leverage, I believe, to compel them to do it. So we're really left to wait on their timeline, and it probably will be drip by drip, to avoid a really horrible situation where it freaks out.
Yeah. Wow. Well, we do know, we don't know what's going to be happening with disclosure, but we do know that we are getting a second season of UFO Witness. First season right now is currently streaming on Discovery Plus. Do we know anything about when we will have a premiere for season 2 of UFO Witness? And also, is there anything that you can tell us about this upcoming season and tease out and sort of how are things looking for season 2?
Well, I'm happy that I can even talk about it, because normally when a season 2 is ordered, we filmed it and then we're sitting on our hands. We can't say anything until the network says something. But the network was like, let's talk about it. Here it is. They got renewed. It kind of came as a surprise to me. They announced it. So this season, Melissa Tittle, who appeared with me in the Hudson Valley, Alien Invasion Hudson Valley, it was like a 2-hour special. She joins me as my partner, and it's really great to have someone to bounce ideas off of, because this first season was the first time I've hosted a show where it's just me, and I was kind of feeling like probably Josh Gates does as he's driving around talking to himself. And I'm like, this is cool, but it really does help to cover ground as well when you can split off and she can go interview someone or check something out, and then we can meet up. And I will say she does not agree with me on a lot of things, which is fine, because I think there's a lot of audience who identify with her way of thinking. But it's been a lot of fun, because we have amped up a lot of the kind of extent to what we'll go to for experimentations, and kind of like how we get there. So not to give too much away, but in one episode, I've been wanting always to actually get up in the air and not just throw a drone up. So I'm flying a plane that I rented, get up there to recreate something. Or I think the audience will see that a lot of these abduction stories, we really get into talking to the people and the emotional aspects of how that's changed their lives and what it means, right? And so thousands upon thousands of people every day wanting to tell their stories. And we set up just recently a website, ufowitness.tv. So even if it doesn't come onto the TV show, people can go there and they could submit their stories, because we could use them at the end of season 2, season 3. As you know, you and I are constantly pitching new shows, and we could even throw some your way, because we get these great videos, and so you can Paranormal Caught On, tape, and you get these people just want to tell their stories, and every now and then you have amazing footage to go along with it. And so I think that it comes at a time too during the congressional reports that we now have that are mandated to come out every 90 days, or was it 90 days? Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
And all this is going to be happening in 2022. It couldn't come at a better time. So premiere date, I honestly don't know. We're still filming the last 2 episodes right now. And then they've got to do post-production. I'm just guessing, and this is not from the network, I'm guessing it won't be earlier than a summer, maybe late summer release.
Yeah. And one thing, really just a a comment on UFO Witness. What I really enjoy about it is, quite frankly, a lot, as much as I love these stories, a lot of times when a show sets out to investigate sightings, they end up being fairly dry, and it kind of lacks a little bit of the emotion and human element. Something I really enjoyed about UFO Witness is that there is a believability as well as a drama and a personal human element to it that I respect, and without being that kind of like stale type of UFO show. And I think you know what I mean about that.
Do you remember back in our sci-fi days, the Paranormal Witness show?
Yes.
Right. So what I really loved about that production company is that when you have the person sit down, do the talking heads interview, but then you do the recreation of it and you can bring in the Hollywood elements. So what's different is that instead of a Travis Walton type embellishment where you're adding things that didn't happen, you can still recreate the emotion and bring the audience into the seat like a blockbuster movie in these little snippets, but based on the real account.
Yeah.
And when, they invited me to take a look at doing this show, I said, I love it. I love it because to recreate in some people's minds, instead of just having the person say yes, and then this happened in the ship, that's all cool. But if you can use the imagination, you truly understand why this is important.
Yeah.
You understand these people are going through experiences that are so traumatic sometimes that it's, hate to use this comparison, but it's almost like the crimes I used to investigate, sexual assaults and traumatic things that these people are affected for their lifetime. And you can't ignore that. You can't say, well, all these people are making it up when something happened to cause them to derail parts of their life, and so that, I think I agree with you, is a really cool aspect of it. And the term UFO Witness really encapsulates what we're doing, is interviewing witnesses.
Yeah. And when that finally gets a premiere date, we'll have to have you back over here. But we know it's on the way. We know season 2 of UFO Witness is on the way. We know that the Alien Abduction, Betty and Barney Hill, and Alien Abduction, Travis Walton, both those shock docs, those specials, launch Friday, February 18th on Discovery Plus. Ben, how else can people support your work and just keep track of everything you're doing?
Yeah, sure. My website, benhansen.com. As you know, like the events, the public appearances have been kind of sparse. We're hoping that gets ramped up this year to where we're doing more of those and traveling around. But that has all the upcoming events and announcements of when shows are airing. But get involved. If anyone has a sighting you think would be interested in an encounter, you can submit that at ufowitness.tv and start talking to your neighbors and friends, because it is one of those things. It has this political. I don't consider myself an activist at all. I feel like, though, this is an important subject that we should all be talking about, because it does have implications, not only for national security, but like things that I think are going to become more important in the future.
Most certainly. I agree. And well, Ben, I appreciate you joining me for this. Hang out backstage for a second. I'm going to take you out of this and wrap up here. But it is a pleasure seeing you, my friend, and hearing from you. And really nicely done job with these shock docs. And I am looking forward to season 2 of UFO Witness. And folks, that is yet another Talking Strange. Ben Hansen, heck of a guy that I truly respect in this field. He really approaches things with an analytical mindset, and he's a reliable person, and he's just very calm. I like how sober he approaches things, which I really appreciate. And thank you guys for listening in. Please give me a follow on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, on Patreon. Watch my interviews at youtube.com/Den of Geek US, and download Talking Strange every week on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. And keep an eye out for upcoming talks with Dacre Stoker, the descendant of Bram Stoker, to discuss 125 years of Dracula and 100 years of Nosferatu. And we also have down the road the cast of Expedition Bigfoot, as well as more on the way with the cast of CBS's Ghost. So wherever you guys are, be safe, stay spooky, and keep it weird.